All right. So, Ricky, Chris, thank you guys for being here. We will
Yeah.
do introductions in just a second, but I wanted to start with like setting the stage a little bit. So, I was saying before we started recording that we're going to do a mini series, right, of conversations with finance leaders. What is top of mind for folks like yourselves, right? Like, what are you guys seeing out there? Like, what are you guys thinking of? Like, what's important? What are challenges that you're facing? What are you still wrestling with? What are some of the things that like, yeah, I got this, and like people need to hear about some of these things. Um, so I'm excited to have some of those conversations. You're the first episode, so thank you for being the first. Yeah, the topic for today, just to start to get into the weeds a little bit, is something that I like to refer to as the complexity challenge. So there's a lot happening in the world, and we're not going to get into politics, I promise. But outside of politics, there's technology, right? AI is all over the place. There's a ton going on with that. We're going to talk about that, although that can be a whole topic on its own. Um, but there's like a lot of data flying around. There's a lot of systems, and there's expectations that are changing over time from finance leaders. So I really want to get in the weeds of that and just like hear from you guys. Like, what is top of mind? How do you think about that complexity? How do you think about what are the big challenges with that? And what are you seeing that actually works in trying to simplify some of those things? So let's start with intros. So yeah, Chris Sands, CFO at InvoiceCloud. This is your third CFO gig, if I got that
Correct.
right.
Yeah.
CFO at IntelliCare before InvoiceCloud, and then before that, CFO at Mineral Tree.
Correct.
And then your background, which I don't think I knew this about you, you started in investment banking.
Yeah. So I'll take over from there. So excited to be here. Thanks for having me, including me in the conversation. I feel like it's a topic where there's lots to discuss and lots of viewpoints on this. So excited for the conversation. So started my career about 7 years doing investment banking, sell side equity research down in New York. And after about 7 years, decided I want to make the pivot and go corporate, ultimately with kind of my eye on becoming a CFO. So took a few leadership positions within finance functions at public companies, so running investor relations and treasury, FP&A, before I got my first CFO opportunity at Mineral Tree, which was, I guess, a little over 8 years ago. So I've been operating as a CFO in the kind of growth equity, private equity backed software technology space ever since. So.
And by the way, one thing that's really interesting about you, Chris, is you bring, because one of the challenges that we're going to talk about is office of the CFO tech stack. And I think you've seen both sides, both from a finance leader perspective, which is how you run your finance organization, but also as the software vendor, right? You providing
Yeah.
those solutions at Mineral Tree and obviously, some of the other companies.
Yeah, at InvoiceCloud as well. It's a good point. 2 of my 3 CFO roles have been in the fintech space, specifically selling applications into the finance function, which is like a
Exactly.
really fun place to be because, in addition to managing the finance function, you're a bit of an internal authority on how the product gets used with the customers. And so that just creates a unique opportunity to contribute to product roadmap and engage with the customers in a level that even our sales team can't. And so I really like the fintech space. I mean, it's interesting for all the reasons I just said. It's complex. And InvoiceCloud, my current company, is a billing and payment software provider in the most simplistic terms. And so we sell into verticals that have a use case to distribute invoices digitally and then provide payment gateway payment methods for our customers to pay them digitally. So, and I've been there almost going to hit my 2-year anniversary coming up next month.
That's awesome. Yeah. Well, thank you for that. Ricky, let's go to you.
Okay.
So,
What do you got?
Ricky, let me make sure that I get your last name right. So, Ricky Mutschwiller, VP of Finance at Abcuro. We're going to talk about your background, but clinical trial biotech based in Boston. I would argue biotech is one of the most complex, industries out there. It's rapidly changing and rapidly evolving based on how the clinical trials go. There's all kinds of regulatory compliance things that are really important. If you're pre-revenue, you really want to make sure that you got your expenses and your forecasting and like all those elements right. But But then your background is more on the audit side. So I guess you got tired of audit, kind of went into biotech. So yeah, give us a little bit
Yes.
more about
So
your background.
so you got it. You got it. You got it. You did it well. So for me, CPA by training. So started my career at PwC. You're kind of cookie cutter auditor. But the similar to what Chris said, had that desire to kind of go into industry. So after around 5 years at PwC, went to a consulting firm. And really helped spend another 5 years really helping companies that were on the path to going public or going through an IPO or now dealing with the rigor of actually being public and everything that comes with that, SOX, 10Ks, 10Qs. But ultimately still felt that desire to go work at a company. And so I've been in biotech since left consulting to join a biotech, been there for the better part of a decade. And my role at Abcuro, like you said, a biotech is changing rapidly all the time. And on the finance side, really dealing with every dollar that goes through. And so understanding whether it's payroll or AP or expense reimbursements, or like you mentioned, we don't have revenue, so financing coming from investors and how you make it all kind of connect and work. So that's where I live and breathe.
Yeah. So I love this because I feel like you guys bring very different perspectives based on your industries. And I think as we get into some of the questions and the conversation, it'll be interesting to see if like you think about some of these things in the exact same way or if there's like some differences. So I think that will be fun. So how about we kick it off? And I think I have a really good question to kick it off. And that is, again, going back to the complexity challenge, there's so much going on, so many tools, so many data. Are finance teams genuinely more in control today than 5 years ago? Or are they less in control? I'd love to hear. How about we start with you, Chris?
In control of what? I don't know if it's more or less, but the scope of the role continues to grow, right? And so all things being equal, I think that makes it harder and probably lends to less control. But like, I pose the in control of what in jest, but I'm a little bit serious as well, right? I mean, I personally don't view the role of the function to necessarily be in control of anything. Like, for instance, I'm constantly telling my peers on the executive team, they're like, oh, the budget, this, the budget. I was like, it's not my budget. It was like, it's our budget. Like, it's the business's budget, right? So like, I'm not in control of the budget. My team helps facilitate it and we make it, and we're responsible for, reporting against it and whatnot. But the team is responsible for controlling the business, managing the business. So, but I think the broad answer to your question is the role continues to get more complex, and I would say even the nature of the change seems to be accelerating, just given everything that's going on with technology and more broadly in the business environment as managing a business becomes more complex. I mean, I like to think about things in terms of spectrums and extremes. Like if you go back 20, 25 years ago, and this obviously predates before I was a CFO, but earlier when I was starting my career, like the role of the finance function, the CFO looked very, very different than it did today, just as a function of, I would say, the nature of the responsibilities that tend to roll up into the finance function. So now there's a huge data element and, strategic finance capabilities that weren't as prevalent within the finance function once upon a time. And then when you dive into the actual complexity of the activities that have been part of finance forever, controllership, accounting, way more complex than it has ever been, FP&A, because of all of the data, because of the demands of the business. Again, I operate in the private equity ecosystem, and certainly those investors have lots of expectations around reporting and data. And so all of it's become more complex, and I know we're going to dive into that. And so all things being equal, I just think it makes the role harder, and therefore probably, to answer your question, like less in
control in a way.
And I think a lot, echoing what Chris says, I think finance knows a lot more now, is expected to know a lot more now, but with less control. And the level of how finance is integrated into the company, like the kind of the expectation of, for, you mentioned like the budget, and people always like to reference like finance owns the budget. And I agree with you completely, where it is the company's budget and finance kind of gathers inputs and then synthesizes. but the expectation continues, or finance is expected to kind of know more and more of, okay, if we pull this lever, what are the 3 other things that get impacted? And
Well, and that was kind of my question, Ricky. Like and I think this agrees with everything you said, Chris, which is there's an element of, because there's so much more that's expected of finance and that keeps shifting, but then you have all this data available, all these tools available. Like, how do you cut through the noise? You said something a few days ago when we talked before this episode and this conversation that caught my attention, Ricky, and I actually wrote it down. You said something along the lines of, we're using AI to produce more output, but we haven't asked whether the output was worth producing in the first place, right? And I thought that was really interesting, and that's very indicative of the question, which is there's all these tools that we can use to create stuff and like derive more data and put things together, which speaks to, yeah, the role is evolving and getting more complex, but what is noise and what is actually like things that help finance teams move forward? In other words, and this is kind of another question that I have, is a finance function getting more strategic, or it's just busier because of the number of tools and number of things that are happening?
I think it is both busier and strategic. But I think the pace at which the busyness is growing is outpacing the strategic aspects. There's a lot more rigor and expectations across the finance function. So like on the accounting side, the requirements for disclosures in financial reporting just keeps growing and growing and growing, not scaling back. And the precision that an FP&A function needs to plan out forecasts and scenarios grows and grows and grows. And what's not necessarily growing as rapidly as the strategic aspects of it. And so there's a lot more burden and time getting those things done versus being that strategic partner in my experience.
In your world. Yeah. Yeah. I remember you mentioned the disclosures, and I'm glad that you brought that up. So how is that, like, let's go through that example. So when it comes to disclosures, I think what you're saying is now we can create a lot of these because the technology is available for us to easily do this. But then there's this question of like, should we be creating all these disclosures? Like, is that how you think about it?
Yeah, I'll put disclosures in there. I'll put internal controls in there where now we have the ability to, if you look at like the requirements in a 10K now versus 10, 15 years ago, there's these new things that are added. But at least in I'll say in my industry, in biotech, when you have these disclosures, there isn't necessarily investor reactions to these new disclosures that said, ooh, this came out and now we know this information we didn't know, and that's a bomb and we're going to react to it. It's more, or if there is a material weakness in internal controls in a 10K, there's not really a reaction from the market or the stakeholders to it. And so, but a little bit of it, it's a tough thing of like, we can do it, but is it really as impactful? Does it matter as much just because we can, should we? It's pretty, I think tools and AI make it more available, but a lot of what can we do, it isn't the same as should we do it.
Exactly. So Chris, how does that manifest for you in terms of like that kind of same point translated to you in terms of, we have all these things now available, everyone asking for things. To your point, there's like demands from the board and the CEO, whatever. How does that translate for you?
I won't make a statement on whether the function itself is getting more strategic or not, but what I can say definitively is that people want it to be more strategic, right? I feel like strategic CFO is one of the most overused terms I kind of hear out there, just because it's broad and can mean a lot of different things. But certainly the expectation from investors, from CEOs and other members of the exec team is that the role and the function become more strategic. As to what precisely that means can be a function of individual companies. And so I'll kind of set that aside for a moment. At the same time, to my earlier comment about the scope of the role and the function getting broader, that necessarily means it's busier as well. There's just more to do. And so, the connection I make between the two is if you're busier, if you have more things to do, I think it's probably harder to be strategic and value add, right? Because there's just a finite amount of hours in the day, and you can only do so many things. And so, the way to balance this, and I certainly wouldn't try to represent that I have this all figured out, but is like relentless prioritization, right? I mean, I think one of the most important things you can do as leader of the finance function, probably any function in a business, is to really have your finger on the pulse of like what matters for the function and what matters for the business, and do everything you can to stay extremely focused on that and making sure it's a priority and you're dedicating time to that, right? Like when I think about working with my team, I can't in most cases help them execute on the day-to-day things that they're doing. But when they're feeling overwhelmed, I'm like, come sit with me and I'll tell you what I don't think you have to do. Like, let's take things off the plate and I'll tell you what I think is important and what's not. And you can kind of figure out how to go from there. And so, again, and this is largely a function of how I think about what the job is. It's like managing the finance function is a big part of the job. I actually think the bigger part of the job is trying to help grow in the business and manage the business with my peers on the executive team, right? Like, I have a buddy and former colleague who said, like, you get the managing the team, and he wasn't a finance person. He's actually a general counsel. He's like, you get all the managing the team for free, like where you can add value as an exec team member is being a proactive, loud voice at the table and broadly managing the business and help grow the business, right? And I mean, that gets into what I think the strategic piece is all about. And so, when I think about how to manage my time and schedule, the more time I can free up to be doing that part of the job, which is how do we grow the business? How do we create enterprise value? The better I'm doing. So, but I can only do that if I'm not reacting to all of the noise in the system, particularly as it pertains to, every little thing popping up in and around the finance function.
I love what you said about hyper-focused prioritization, right? And like sitting down with your team and saying, well, what's on your plate? Like, what are the things that you're doing? And like, you should not be doing these 5 things or whatever number it is. Just curious, how often do you need to do that? Like, because everyone's bombarded with things to do and it gets busy. So I'm just wondering, like, is that like a weekly thing that you do? Is that
Well, I was going to ask, what do you think the answer is?
once a month, maybe?
How about 3 times a day? So and again, but on average, so this is just me. Are you familiar with the Eisenhower Matrix?
No.
So you're not either? Oh,
No.
guys, okay, this is...
I know.
I've already added enough value here. So, named after General and former President Eisenhower, it's a 4-square matrix with 2 axes. One is urgency and one is importance. So you can think of urgent and important, urgent not important, important not urgent, not important not urgent. Obviously, the last one I just mentioned, like, why are you even doing these things, period, right? And so I have over time kind of like modified one to the way I kind of view the world. But I'm a list taker, and I keep all the things that are kind of popping up, and the doc just is open on my desktop 7 days a week. I use it on the weekends. I have a version for my personal life as well. But I'm constantly, things pop up through the day. Oh, I got to do this. And I kind of drop it in, and then, I have a kind of calendar for the week of just the weekdays, but I'm just always moving things around. Like, what do I need to do? What needs to get done? What's actually important, what's not, and like kind of keeping this North Star of, and like, this is a challenge in every single job, where it was finance or anything else. Like, things just pop up during the day that are urgent you have to do. But like, is that going to help us grow by an extra 2-3 points? Or is it some reporting disclosure thing that needs to get done for audited financial statements, right? Which is important. It's part of doing the job. But whether it gets done today or, we're not public, so if the audited financials come a week or 2 weeks later, like, that's probably an acceptable trade-off. So, I think the short answer to your question is, I personally use like a doc. I'm sure there's lots of tools out there. And again, I'm a visual person, so I just like seeing everything on the list. And sometimes it gets to be so overwhelming, and I take everything off to the side and I just rebuild it up, as opposed to like moving the pieces around, because that's just like a way of kind of clean.
I love what you're saying, Chris, because you talked about how you do that with your team, maybe multiple times a day, multiple times a week.
Do it myself multiple
But
times a
that's-
day.
Okay.
Not with my team. Yeah. Not with
Good, because I was like,
not with my
oh
team.
my
No,
goodness.
sorry.
Yeah.
So that's a big distinction.
Well, I was going to go in that direction and
Yeah.
say it's great that it's not just you thinking about the team and what's on their plate and make sure that they're cutting through the noise, but like you're self-aware and you're like doing that for yourself. And
So I
like,
primarily do it
that's
for
what-
myself,
yeah.
and then I offer it to them when they're feeling overwhelmed or stuck or not sure where they should spend their time, right? And so and the onus is on them to let me know when they're feeling that way. I mean, sometimes I can recognize it, but I know what my expectations are for them, and then based on my own prioritization for myself, that helps me set expectations on where I think they need to be spending their time. And if I'm not getting the outputs related to that, then I also know that we probably need to have a conversation about what's getting prioritized. But
Yeah,
yes, so
that's good.
whenever we're doing the editing of this, make sure it is clear that I'm not
Yeah,
talking
right.
to everyone on my team
Three
three times
times
to
a
say
day.
about what they're doing. Yes, please, good Lord. So.
Ricky, I was going to ask you, so getting also a little bit more tactical and maybe a different lens to think about busyness is like tech stack, right? And like number of systems that you have. How many systems would you say your team touches every month?
So I actually counted.
Okay, you did,
I
okay.
went, and I went on fingers, and then I had to stop because it went over 10. No joke, 10 systems every single month, more than 10. Not much more, but when and that's a lot.
Yeah.
And a lot of time, one of the things I say to my team, and one thing I believe in is like when I think of how to do things, and I have a scale of how well do you want to do it, and it's based on the frequency. If you're doing something every day, you want a great process. If you're doing something once a year, I'm kind of like, we don't need to invest any time into this. Monthly, you want a good process. The fact that we have more than 10 systems for a clinical stage biotech is a lot to me. And every system we have has its own specialized function, what we use it for, and why we think it's the best thing, but it creates a lot of extra time. Just you have different sets of data, you have different logins. I probably reset my password on a system like once a week. And you just now you're creating, we've said the word complexity, a lot of extra complexity, because you don't know if all your systems are saying the same thing.
Right.
Just creates challenge. But to answer your question, more than 10.
So let me ask you guys a question and see if you. I'm just curious to see what you guys think. How many times? So there was a study that was conducted back in 2022, and basically Harvard Business Review, they measured how much people switch between applications a day. This is 4 years ago.
Okay, phones or computers?
Computers.
Okay.
What do you guys think the number was back
Like
then?
individual switches.
Yeah, like switching between systems through the day.
Oh God,
25,
75.
70.
3,600 times a day. Obviously, that includes like kind of switching between email and like, your chat
That was a trick
window.
question. That was very nice. 25. No, it's actually 3,000. Good guess.
3,600.
Count today. So I'll
Yeah,
do it
yeah.
for the rest of the day.
And before that, there was another study of the same thing by Pegasystems, I think 2 years before that. And the number was something
big.
like
More than
7,500,
Yeah.
something like that.
Mhm.
So the point is, this is getting worse, right? And that
Yeah.
speaks to your point, Ricky, of like, can't count the systems. So you probably have more systems. You guys are bigger, so you probably have more systems than.
I didn't count, but I was assuming it was over a dozen. I could probably, right off the top of my head, name 10. So I know there's more.
And that's just monthly. If you go to like the ones, if you
Yeah.
go quarterly and annually, you're probably up over 20, 30.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think, there's this article that I was reading last week. It was from, I think it was either payments.com or CFO.com. And they basically said the CFO needs to be a bit of an architect when it comes to like building tech stacks and like really thinking about how to architect that entire set of tools in order, again, to cut through the noise and make sure that people are not just getting busy because they're getting busy, right? So there's like this idea of people being more thoughtful about what they purchase, how they purchase these solutions, how does that architecture look like, and then what are the things that, finance leaders are thinking of when it comes to like putting together that. So it's almost like tech stack architecture is becoming this like strategy or strategic element that CFOs are thinking about. Like, would you say that's the case for you guys?
Yes, definitely. We have like, and I could speak for my company specifically. There are two of our key systems that finance owns, and I won't say what the systems are because I don't want to get in trouble. But one of the things we learned was should my company ever go public, one of the systems doesn't service public companies, and now we've spent like 5 years investing time into this software that we will
Because they're
have
not SOC compliant.
for several. They just
Okay.
choose not to deal with public companies. They're SOC compliant, but they just don't want to kind of.
Wow. Okay.
Yeah. And so like one of the things, let alone for a finance function the process of going public is very burdensome. To add this extra, we have to sunset this system and
Brutal.
integrate, just like unnecessary, right? So like well, I wasn't there when we went onto the system, but I probably wouldn't have foreseen that down the line. But so that's like a thing I wish I'd known. We have another system that we use that I learned, should my company ever commercialize, meaning our drug gets approved and we start selling it, they don't service those types of companies because there's something called Sunshine Act compliance, very specific for biotech, but they don't do it, meaning I'm also going to have to sunset that system and move over to a new one.
Yeah.
These are systems that not just finance owns it, but the entire company uses it, kind of like your AP system if people have to approve. So everyone will see this impact. And so that's more of like one thing that jumps out at me. The other thing with the tech stack roadmap, I attended a conference last year, and a firm presented a roadmap of systems based on the stage of company, specific for biotech, but basically saying before you have clinical trials, once you've launched. And I remember taking a picture of it because it was way too many systems to remember. There was rows, and the systems started and they ended. And it was so complex to think, oh my God, there's like dozens of things to remember. And I was like, oh, I got to remember 6 months before this, I got to put in this new type of system that's not even on my radar. The tech stack's become so important to the finance function. And there's also these little bombs of like, oh, this system will help you only to a certain point, and then you got to change. Things that I wasn't really considering 5-10 years ago, where it was like, oh yeah, you just got to really focus on like your ERP, and that's going to do everything for you.
And I think to your point, Ricky, if you ask anyone, I think most people would say, yeah, simple is better, right? Like if we can have less systems, that's the ideal state, right? But like there's also like challenges with that, right? Because sometimes you just need what you need. So like, Chris, what's your opinion?
Yeah. So, and I want to get back to the thing you just said. So I generally agree with what Ricky said. So I think the original question was like, does the CFO skill set need to include kind of systems architect? And I think yes and no in that, like, I think architect's probably the right way to describe it. Certainly the examples Ricky used where, big systems, enterprise-wide systems, like the CFO needs to be dangerous enough to see around corners and be like, oh, we have this corporate ambition to go public. And so systems need to adhere to that and support that. So having enough depth where you can see around those corners and help drive the team, I think yes. The kind of no part of the answer to me is, and this gets into the part you said, whether like you have a lot of different systems. It's like, when I work with my team, it's less about telling them how to do the job. It's like, hey, this is what we need. This is what the function needs to deliver. I want you to be as efficient as possible. If there's tools that can help you, like you can go out and figure out what tool to help you and why. And we discussed the business case. And so it's like having a good view of the macro picture, but also being comfortable to delegate certain aspects of it down into the team so that they can optimize the way they operate and deliver their deliverables. But that gets to, I think, your point, which is like, it's a bit of a fantasy to think that there are these systems that can do everything, right? And I think the way the finance tech ecosystem has evolved, and understandably so, is like, companies have unique needs, right? So it's very hard for any one company, even systems of records, your ERPs out there, to have a ton of depth in all of the different workflows that exist in finance, right? So it's like, if you're an ERP, you're a core system, you're a system of record, like you have to be really good at a certain set of things. Is AP automation serving 7 different verticals and the unique nuances of how AP works in 7 different verticals one of those things? And I think they've, for the most part, made a decision no, right? Like what we will do, and this is the beauty of the tech ecosystem that we live in today, is they can open up APIs, and folks that are experts on individual workflows, AP automation, billing, and payments can kind of plug into those. And so, I think the tech ecosystem has evolved, or the tech stack for finance ecosystem has evolved in a way that makes sense, just given the unique needs of businesses. I don't foresee that changing in the future. And obviously we're in this unique time with, well, can AI help them do more and faster? I think the answer is yes. But, if I'm in the software space, we serve a specific type of workflow. I think the prevailing sentiment out there is that, being in core workflows where you have either vertical or, very specific functional expertise and depth is actually a bit of a moat against AI and some of the broader generalization that's happening.
Yeah, we'll definitely dive into AI a little bit more. But you said something really interesting, Chris, which is, in order, like, it's a bit of an illusion to think that like one system is going to do it all, which I totally agree with. But then the question that I wanted to follow up on is, what's top of mind for you of the things that drive where you actually need to introduce the complexity of like another system that's better at something versus using like the bare bones, like ERP or CRM functionality? And you mentioned something about industry, right? So I can see how certain verticals, to your point, like Sunshine Act, right? Like there's things that certain industries will need that you need to add that, right? And like that's part of what drives maybe some of the complexity of some of the big list of systems that you saw in that slide. Like, what are examples of that? It's industry. What else can be a driver to kind of add some complexity?
I do feel like industry is a big one. The nature of the workflow. So I'll just use one from so not one that we're a user of, but for our products and our customers. So I mentioned that we do billing and payments for verticals. If you double click on that, one of the verticals we serve is the insurance industry. We do both inbound payments, so people paying their policy premiums through our application, but we also do outbound or disbursement payments. So insurance companies paying out claims or agent commissions or premium refunds. Like in the claims instance, paying out claims, like there's some things that I would have never ever thought of, which is like, oh, you make a auto or home claim to your insurance carrier, and so you're expecting a check, but you have a car loan or a home loan. Well, that payment flow needs to go through the lien holder who has that on the home. So like it's completely changed. It's not as easy as just sending a check out or sending a digital payment out. There's this completely bespoke workflow because of how that industry works. And so, that's just one example that just came to top of mind because of where our business operates. But there are thousands of those based on the nature of the industry that you're operating in, the nature of the workflow, and then company setups.
Yeah.
Individual dynamics specific to a company where they're like, I've seen this in my career in some of the fintechs, which is like, if you're NetSuite and you're a big system, you can go into companies and be like, you need to change to fit to the way NetSuite works. If you're a smaller emerging SaaS player, like they may not be willing to change their AP process to fit the way the AP automation solution works, right? So the AP automation solution needs to be flexible enough to accommodate different configurations and setups at the business. And so
That's actually pretty aligned with what we see at Charted, right? So we see
I did that on purpose for you.
Yeah. Yeah. So
Yeah.
industry is kind of a big driver. And then we're seeing other things like obviously company maturity, right? Like where are they in their life cycle and how big they are. Another good example is global footprint, right? Like it's a very different motion to have just US, USD operation versus, global international. So like some of that stuff really matters to companies. And then that can introduce some complexity, which by the way, how big was the jump in that slide that you talked about in terms of number of systems as, the company
Oh,
progresses?
I could probably find it on my phone. But I'm guessing it probably had 20 rows and like 4 or 5 columns. So at least 20 types of systems. So like a row could be like ERP and it could say QuickBooks to NetSuite to SAP. So there's probably at least 50 different systems in this roadmap.
That sounds like a lot.
Yes.
I'm going to take a guess and say a systems integrator made this presentation.
Love that.
If this is daunting, you're right, but don't worry, we can help you for a hefty price.
Yeah.
Right.
Modest fee of $1 million.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, actually, the point you were making before about, and you were talking about at InvoiceCloud, the specific example of why a system maybe needs to have more customization or specification. And I think every company has that, whether it is a unique set of requirements the company has that's unique to them, like a very specific approval, or it is just the nature of the business. Every business has their special items that systems just may not be able to handle. Like we have one contract that has over 500 lines on the contract that we have to track in our ERP, and we don't have another single contract that has even more than 100. And so our system is not designed to handle a 500 contract line, but also we're not going to go sign up for that because it's an N of one.
Yeah.
And so I think it's hard to not have any sort of customization or specifics.
Let's elevate the conversation a little bit. So we talked a little bit about tech stack and the systems. I'd love to hear if you guys, because we talked about this idea that simple is better, right? And I think everyone's always thinking that, simple is better, and that makes sense. Can you guys think of either an example when you thought that something that you wanted to simplify looked like a good idea and turned out to be a disaster, or a situation where you were very concerned about simplification and it was totally fine and it was like a big success? It doesn't need to be systems related. It can be anything. Just as a finance leader, maybe an example of one or the other or both, if you can think of one.
So we don't have a specific example on where I kind of thought simplistic was better and then it kind of turned out the complexity was necessary. However, I feel like I have this conversation with my team all the time because, again, it's very easy from my role to be like, oh, we should just simplify it and do it this way. And then they're pretty quick to be like, oh, Chris, like, but this is why we do it this way. And I'm like, okay, fine. Like you went on. Well, I'm not going to press this any further. So again, I think, and this gets to like Ricky's example in the 500 lines where it's like you may set something up and they're like, okay, well, the reality is we have this contract and it's structured this way and it's the most important contract in the business. And so, we have to do what we need to do to support that. So not a specific example, but I feel like there are lots of specific examples out there. I still think it's the right thing to do to ask the question about simplicity to make sure people are thinking about that. And even if you can't land it in your target simple state, perhaps there's improvements from the current state by eliminating some of the complexity. The other question you asked, which I think was the inverse of that, where, you were worried about the simplicity, but it turned out being great. This is kind of not exactly that, but when we were talking about questions, this example came to me, and it has more to do with running the business. When I got to InvoiceCloud, we were making a big push to drive margin improvement, EBITDA margin improvement. And so we collectively, as an exec team, extended leadership team, decided we were basically going to hold our headcount flat for like a full year. And of course, there's ins and outs and moving around, how different teams are staffed, et cetera. But the business is growing 20+%, right? And so the prevailing thought in the business was we can't support the growth without adding more people. And everyone was worried they were going to break the business. And I'll cut to the punchline. It was amazing. Not only did we kind of achieve what we wanted to do from a margin perspective, it opened everyone's eyes to what was actually possible, right? When you just kind of push yourself, and we got better and stronger and more efficient as an organization. Again, it was every business I've been in, like, again, totally independent of finance and complexity and all of that. But like at the ELT table, you'll kind of hear like, that will break the business, that will break the business. I think not surprisingly, businesses are very resilient.
Yeah.
Whether it is the example I just used or many other things, tech, et cetera. So, that's the example that came.
I love that example because I think it's so true, Chris.
Sorry to the
No,
employees at Charted. If Bernardo's coming home with a new idea.
But it's so true. I think a lot of times we just assume that, there's all these things that we need, but it just takes a little bit of creativity. And it's a fine line, right? Because you want to be at times scrappy and at times creative, and you don't want to, get too much on that side of like too scrappy. But if you find that right balance, it's amazing.
Yeah.
It's really good.
Yeah.
All right.
I think the simplicity, a lot of it is I think simplicity of why, when we're doing something, why are we doing it? And that has the example I think of recently for our company. We were going through a fundraise, and we built this whole bottoms up. What do we want to spend this money on? And it ended up being like 10, 15 different things, but we had to distill it down to something that was consumable for decision makers who maybe didn't have hours and hours to spend on this. And we bucketed it into really 3 items. We are raising money to do this, this, and this. And we had to bundle things up, even if it wasn't perfectly matched to those items, because otherwise someone couldn't understand, okay, 5% of the proceeds are going to this and 6% are going to this. And because it was the real answer why was because no one could understand something too complex, or no one could get excited about it. And I've seen that work.
I'm going to jump in because what you just said in my mind is the most important skill set for a CFO to have, which is the ability to synthesize all of this data into a message that resonates with the intended audience and answers or questions before they can ask them, right? And this is where, and again, kind of, I made the comment about strategic CFO being overused earlier. But I think the ability to synthesize data and convey, clear, insightful messages is really what that means. And it is sometimes a hard leap for people in the finance function to make that, because kind of inherent in our DNA is to be super detail oriented in the numbers, and through your career ascension, like that's what you're doing. And if you're, you get ahead because the numbers are right and you know them inside and out, and it can be really hard. My first CFO role, we were a pretty lean finance team. So I was in the weeds, certainly more than I care to be at this point in my career. And it was really hard to go from in the weeds all the way up to being able to synthesize. And so sometimes I would get kind of like bogged down in the weeds, and my boss would be like, what's the point? What are you trying to tell me here? Right. And so, that is just, sorry to interrupt, but it's like, we're talking about the complexity of the function and all that, but like broadly speaking, that ability to synthesize information in a compelling way is like, in my opinion, the most important skill set for CFO.
And I'm assuming, so you mentioned something really interesting, that when you're in the weeds, it's hard to kind of elevate up, which I totally agree with. But I would assume, let me know, maybe this is not right, but as you are more, higher level in maybe bigger organization as a CFO, I would assume that you really need to work on that skill of like synthesizing, because now you're not in the weeds, right?
Yeah.
So you're not in the detail, but you still need to have that ability to clearly articulate the right messaging and the right things for the right audience, right? So I think that also becomes a little trickier, I would assume.
Um, I I think it's easier to be. I think it is easier to do that if you're further away.
Yeah.
And I remember I had a boss, CFO, kind of the job before my first CFO, and like, we would spend hours working on this, blah blah blah, and we come in and we look at the slide. He's like, "That number's not right." And we're like, "How could he possibly know that?" Because that number is a buildup of 6 Excel spreadsheets, but when you're not in the weeds, it's just like the pattern recognition. And so, like, to be clear, like, I think having the background of being in the weeds, so and can, where things look off and how things should be, is kind of a prereq skill set to be able to synthesize things really, really well. But I personally find it's actually easier, right? And you know, I've been through the primary career. I know how these things work from a quantitative and technical accounting finance perspective, and so I think you kind of know where to poke with the team. And again, like, it's not to say that you're not doing the work in the background with the team to kind of understand everything, but I personally find it actually to be a little bit easier.
Yeah, that's great to hear.
And I'm jealous of Chris because I'm still living in the details and having to deal with somewhere strategic, and it is a real struggle.
It's really hard. Well, and just in the back of your mind, like, someone asks a question and like you didn't think to answer it because like you already know the answer because you're in it, as opposed to being able to recognize, what are the obvious questions that people are going to ask here. Like, I tell my team, I hope you get wide audience on this, but no one on my board. Like, the way I like to do my board slides is just the right level of detail where I can anticipate with 90% certainty the question they're going to ask, because then I'm ready with the answer. I answer it. They feel like they've asked the question. I look smart. We move on. The end. Successful board meeting.
That's great.
So,
but this was awesome, and that was a great example, Ricky, because I think it comes back full circle to this idea of like, cutting through the noise, right? And like going back to simple, quote unquote, right? And try to distill like what really matters to the right audience. I would love to talk about AI now. So I'm going to read you guys a few statistics, and then I want to get your reaction to some of this data. And I'm sure you've probably seen some of this data already because it was out there. So this is from Deloitte. 87% of CFOs say AI is critical to their operations, but only 21% think it's actually delivered value. So that's the first one. Second one's from Gartner. 60% of CFOs plan to increase their finance AI investment by 10% or more this year, and another 24% plan increases of 4% to 9%, which means roughly about 84% of CFOs are actively increasing AI investments this year. MIT published a report that said 95% of AI pilots fail to reach production. So I think that's kind of an interesting curveball. And then I'm going to quote OpenAI CFO, who said that people who get left behind are the ones not embracing AI fast enough.
let's just take the OpenAI CFO off the table. Why wouldn't he say that?
Yeah.
I don't disagree with what he said, but a very healthy amount of cynicism is warranted there.
We have two finance leaders here, and we just went through some of this data and some of, what your peers are saying and how they are thinking about it. Obviously, it's different based on different situations, company stage, how they see the world, whatever. But I'm interested in, like, what do you guys think about this?
I agree with all of those statements, which I think is a reasonable position. I think there's nothing that's mutually exclusive there. It can all be true. We're at a really interesting time with this technology. And, I feel like the stuff that's out in the media tends to be sensational, right? I mean, we live in this attention economy, so we get all these sensational headlines and whatnot. But the technology will be transformational. The finance use cases, which I think is aligned with some of the stats you said there, are still very emergent, right? Like we're a software company. Clearly the markets are telling us that people are concerned about what AI is going to do to software business models and who will be the winners and the losers. We're a very AI forward organization. Like everyone in our org has a ChatGPT enterprise license. Everyone has a Claude enterprise license. Like we're not picking between the two because we don't feel like we have time to,
You're
see which
basically,
one's
let's
better.
move.
We
Yeah,
want
let's
everyone to
move.
have the best possible tools that they have, and that's an investment that's worthwhile making. But so, that's just a little context on, my personal experience, which this is, we're AI forward. We have and continue to incorporate in all parts of the businesses. But if I think about like 2025 versus 2026, like the use cases in finance in 2025 were way less impactful than they were certainly in our R&D org. So think about the coding applications and our sales and marketing and how we prospect and message and do account intelligence and interact with prospects, support our customers using AI tools for frontline service and support. All of those were very clear very quickly, and I think we jumped on them and saw great efficiencies. In finance last year, less clear, right? I think it's, we know this can help us operate more efficiently, but, certainly not applying it and getting the results that we were seeing in other parts of the org. That's starting to change pretty quickly in 2026, which is why I think some of those stats on, CFOs being bullish.
But that
on
agrees with basically, everything that we just read, which is everyone is eager to get there.
Yeah.
But there's still, it's still a little bit early in some area. Like, of course, you're driving a lot of value from licenses for Claude or ChatGPT. There's other parts of the organization where like value's clear, it's driving it, it's awesome. But then for finance, it feels like people are still trying to figure it out outside of some of the general purpose tools.
Yeah, but it's emerging quickly, right? I mean, I
It
think
is,
like
yep.
so I mentioned we have Claude, like the Claude co-work stuff is insane if you've used it. And the Claude Excel plugins are far beyond what the ChatGPT ones are. I mean, this could be literally changing as we sit here, and I expect it will.
Yeah, and this is what, like a couple months?
Yes,
right? Like,
exactly.
It's very fast moving.
And then the other part that's important, like we expect a lot of our benefits from AI in the finance function to come via our vendors and our tech stack, right? And so we're seeing their capabilities evolve very, very quickly. And so, part of how we think about incorporating it broadly into the function is not just homegrown tools or modifying processes and how we work, although there's plenty of that. It's how does it change how we think about our tech stack and which vendors are, leveraging AI to the maximum extent to provide benefits. So it's happening for sure, which is exciting because like last year I felt kind of like a loser internally because I look at my peers and I'm like, I don't have anything as good to report. I got a little comfort to going out into the broader CFO ecosystem network locally here in Boston. And I was hearing a lot of how I was feeling, which is, we're not seeing slam dunk use cases, even though the technology broadly is evolving very quickly.
And I think the other part, because I think it can do a lot, and I need one of those Claude Enterprise subscriptions, so maybe toss it over my way. Because I also think Claude integrates with it, like it does with NetSuite and
Yeah.
I think we're at like we are very close to the point where I think you can use AI tools to do a lot. I don't know if finance is there with the trust side of it though, where anything that I use AI for, or if my team uses AI for it, we treat it at like the level of like a staff preparing it. I'm not like 100. I don't trust.
You're
it.
cautious.
It is a first drafter, give creative ideas maybe, but not to the point where I like let it fly.
I mean, the vast majority of finance is deterministic. These models are probabilistic, right? So like there is a correct answer for a journal entry and financial statements and all of that. So you can't just toss it into an LLM and be like, oh, well, it's, 90% right. So that's good enough, right? I mean, that can work with customer service and, sales and marketing and the like, but it doesn't in ours. So I think that's right. And I mean, I think that doesn't mean there's not a huge role to get in efficiencies, but like you have to remodel your processes to account for that, right?
Yeah, one of the things that I was hoping to bring up here and just just hear your thoughts on this. It goes back to exactly the point of trust and what you just said, Chris, which is there's a lot of companies in the quote unquote office of the CFO tech stack that are making pretty bold claims, right? So I have a couple here that I wrote down. One is AI that runs your finance operations,
Challenge.
or
Keep going.
there's another one that says autonomous fill the blank, right? It can be AP automation powered by agentic AI, right? So there's all these like really bold, big claims that a lot of these companies are making. And to your point, Ricky, it feels like that needs to be explained further, and it needs to be more specific of like, okay, how exactly are you doing things, and how do we actually earn CFO's trust, right? That like you actually can trust whatever the AI is doing, which needs to be explained, and then get comfortable so that you can start using that piece of technology, right? So that can be, I'm assuming, tricky, right? For like a CFO to navigate. It's like, okay, well, we don't trust AI yet. And there's all these bold claims. So like we got to dig in the weeds a little bit more. Is that how you guys think about it?
Yeah, I mean, like the moment we're in right now, there's just a ton of AI washing going on, right? For lack of a better term. And so I, just laugh at those comments.
Yeah.
Like a real use case that I tested AI for.
These are real, by the way. Like
Yeah.
I believe they're real.
There's like companies claiming these things.
So I recently, and sorry, I keep going to these financial reporting things, but I recently used AI and I uploaded our financial statements, like a 50-page document. And I said, can you please go through this and please check for every internal consistency. If we reference R&D spend on one section, is it the same number everywhere throughout? And I knew that there was something wrong. And AI and it looked through and it did not catch it. So I said, but what about these 2 pages? And it said, oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
I
My
missed
bad. Yeah.
Right. And so like your trust factor, if that's a person where they said, oh yeah, I did it and it's good. And then you say, but what about this? Your trust factor's gone. And so like, I think it could get there because it does learn, but it's just not yet.
Yeah.
And I obviously then took it and I asked my staff accountant to do the same exercise that AI did.
But I think like, so you don't put it in there, it says it's fine, and then you ship it off to the auditors, but you put it in there, hopefully it catches 10 things, and then you read it, and the read takes, half the time as it should have taken because it's already caught the obvious stuff, right?
Right. Yeah, 100% agree. It's helpful. It's not full reliance yet.
Yeah. Which, by the way, is good. Like, I don't think we want it doing everything.
Yeah, there's been a lot of conversation internally at Charted precisely on how do we make sure that as we push more AI features and more ways to do AI with our product, that we earn that trust, right? Through clearly explaining what it does, what is the business outcome, and like where there's things where like it needs to be reviewed, right? Just so that finance teams can know exactly like what they're getting right out of the technology, which to your point, Chris, like,
as the provider, that's hard. As the consumer, my expectation is that if I pay for it, it will do it. And then like, no, it's not.
Yeah, exactly. Which is why these claims are really, it's tricky, right? Because you want to make sure that it works.
When you think just, again, like you serve the finance function, we serve the finance function. I manage a finance function. I mean, I was having a conversation with our controller yesterday, and he was vetting one of our existing vendors' new AI capabilities that they're upselling. And he's like, okay, this particular module, AI module that you're trying to sell me on does this. This process takes, 2 hours in aggregate each year, 10 minutes a month or whatever. And he's like, but you're charging me $2,000 for it, so it's $1,000 an hour. Like, that doesn't make sense. Like that ROI doesn't make sense, right? And so we're in this moment where like everyone's feeling pressure to put AI into the product from a software perspective, roll it out there. But like, is it just there's so much pressure to do that and say that because this is where we're in the ecosystem versus being like, is there a good product market fit for this AI use case with my customer base? So it was just kind of like an interesting conversation.
100%. Yeah, it's an interesting time. Go ahead.
I will be thrilled for the day, or I don't know, thrilled or I'm afraid of the day where you can like iterate with generative AI or some other AI to say like, hey, the same way I would talk to my finance team and say, hey, can you tell me which consultants were over budget this month, or can you send me can you let me know the 5 largest bills that we paid in the last 6 months? I would love if I could chat that and get that answer.
That exists today.
Does it?
Oh yeah.
And
Oh yeah.
actually,
Oh yeah.
and so there has to be that integration then with some AI, with ERPs, trusting and relying and getting it correct.
Yeah, I mean, Cloud Cowork can do that for you.
So see, that's like what I knew.
You need a license, right?
Yeah.
We don't use Claude. We have an enterprise AI, but it's not Claude.
Those capabilities exist today.
Yeah. And it's moving quickly, and it'll get
See,
better and better.
There you go.
It'll get better and better.
So
that you can do for sure.
All right, guys, I'm going to try to wrap it up. Thank you for being flexible with the time. Really appreciate it. One last question. We talked a lot about the complexity challenge. When it comes to navigating the complexity challenge and cutting through the noise and keeping your teams focused, what is one piece of advice that you would give the audience, the people listening, watching this? What is the one thing that you would say to them as they navigate these challenges?
I'd say none of us are creating the wheel. And so like what I've found is talking to people in finance, you will get people will commiserate with you, people will give you good ideas. I just learned that what I hope for AI is it. And like my advice,
Good example right here
is like, don't be afraid to talk to your network, and because those are the people that are going to know exactly how you feel and what you're going through to give the best advice. So like,
I love that.
being open and chatting.
Yeah. I guess mine would be like you're not going to be able to conquer the complexity, right? Like the job continues to evolve, it gets more complex, the scope gets larger, the environment is extremely dynamic. So living with the complexity is just going to be part of the job, part of our careers. And so, don't set the expectation that you're going to be able to win or kind of beat the complexity. It's just managing it is a core part of the job. And so arm yourself with the tools, which is not software, it's behavioral tools on how you manage yourself and how you manage your team to do the best you can against the complexity and try to, like I said before, relentlessly prioritize and make sure you're doing the best to spend the time delivering the most value. But again, just having realistic expectations. There's no CFO who just sits there and like only thinks big picture, 9-10 hours a day and then goes home, right? That doesn't exist. So just make sure you set your expectations in a reasonable way and do the best that you can.
Yeah. Well, that's a great way to end the episode. Gentlemen, thank you.